Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar to celebrate International Women's Day. So just to make sure that you're on the right webinar today, this webinar is about how HR and managers can support maternity leave returners. My name is Belyea, and I'm going to be your moderator extraordinaire. So I am the co-founder and the Chief Operations Officer at Talivest. I would like to say a big thank you to our panel speakers, who I'm really delighted to have us joining, and I will be introducing them very shortly. So first, just a little bit about Talivest and what we do. At Talivest, we have a very unique approach to employee engagement, where we use a really holistic approach to listening to employees, right from when an employee is onboarded into an organization through their lifetime, where we do things like pulse surveys, and when they leave, we do the whole offboarding exit process. And more recently, we have been doing more around maternity leave and as well remote working, which is obviously really timely at the moment. So I'd like to welcome all of our guests for joining us out there. We have a lot of different types of organizations today that obviously, you know, this topic is something that's very topical, which is great. So nice to virtually welcome you all, and you're all very welcome. So one of the things that was really great is that when people were signing up for the webinar, they had the opportunity to submit their questions. And this has really helped us form the discussion with our panel today. So thank you, everyone. I know some of the comments and some of the questions that we had were not only from an organizational perspective, but also from a personal. So thank you for being brave at asking those questions. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our fabulous panel. So we have Claire Flannery. You want to give a wave, Claire? So Claire is a coaching psychologist with over 15 years of HR leadership experience. She's the director of a company called Strength Within, which is a coaching consultancy and specializes in helping employers to create family-friendly workplaces to attract, engage, and retain working parents and guardians. Along with maternity and parent coaching, Claire also runs inclusive leadership, expecting parents, and return to work workshops. So obviously Claire is going to be, you know, our expert around all the great things that we should be doing out there, which is great. Welcome.
Thanks, Laura.
And then, that's great. And then we have Mary. Hi, Mary.
Hi there.
So Mary Ruane is an audit partner in PwC here in Ireland, in Dublin, and she specializes in asset management industry. She's been working at PwC over the last 18 years, and she's worked with an extensive range of clients in Ireland. And she also, you know, would manage quite a big workforce. So I'm sure she has lots of experience with women. And I know herself recently coming back from maternity leave. And then all the way from Stockholm, Sweden, we have Karolina Rosenberg. Hello, Karolina. So Karolina is a human capital management consultant at Oracle, as I mentioned, located in Stockholm, and she helps organizations on their digitalization journey. Karolina has a background both in HR and business process design, and she's worked and had maternity leaves both in Ireland and in Sweden. So welcome, Karolina. And then last but not least, we have Jeff Matthews. So Jeff is the Senior Director of Sales at LinkedIn for their learning solutions for both EMEA and LATAM. So over the last 10 years at LinkedIn, Jeff has held several leadership roles managing global teams. Previous to that, he would have worked for Salesforce and Oracle in Canada. And Jeff has also been really involved with Plan Ireland in advocating female rights in Africa. So welcome. So today, we really wanted to host a webinar on a topic that might not be as widely discussed as, you know, some of the other, you know, topics that you see a lot of webinars are. So this topic, you know, is one that actually really resonates to me really personally, having, you know, been on maternity leave twice, having very different experiences in different companies and coming back. So I'm really, really excited to get into it today. So one of the things that we wanted to do before we ran this webinar was to get some research to get a gauge of, you know, how women are feeling when they're returning from mat leave and the support that they're getting and what some of the concerns are. So interestingly, so we did a survey, we had about 200 women respond, and basically about 45% of the women who responded said that they were not satisfied with the support from their organization, and around 47% were not satisfied with the support from their manager. So obviously that's half of women that are returning that, you know, organizations are not quite getting it right yet. What I thought was really interesting was some of the actual comments that women had, you know, provided to us in the research. So some of the positive comments, you know, was around how, you know, their management was really supportive in flexible hours. The direct team and managers, you know, ensure that they're able to get out the door to pick up the kids at the crèche at the end of the day. So some really positive things happening. But then some of the things that weren't as positive were, you know, the perception from colleagues and management that they, you know, you're not as committed as you were before you had children. Comments about taking half a days, leaving on time to get to the crèche. There's a perception they're leaving early. And the feeling, one of the ones that I read that really resonated with me was the feeling that, you know, that you have to do extra. So you work long into the night, you get up early in the morning to make sure that you're staying and able to juggle everything. And then, you know, you're maybe go down to a 4-day work week, but you're really still doing your 5 days in those 4 days. So I thought those, you know, comments would, you know, would resonate with us. So not only do 50% of women feel unsupported, the research out there is kind of daunting from a financial perspective as well. For example, there was research done by the UK-based Institute for Fiscal Services that studied the gender gap that widens consistently after the birth of the first child, largely because many women, you know, may opt for part-time, they miss out on promotions, they miss out on wage increases. And interestingly, by the time their children are 12, they are earning roughly about a third less than men. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is to hand things over to our panel. And Claire, I'm gonna pick on you first, Claire. So what do employees really want from their employer on their return?
Mm-hmm. Well, what do they want? I suppose really the main thing they want is they want to feel welcomed back. You know, they want to feel like they're a valued employee and that they belong in the organization, you know, after having been away for a time. And so from what I see in the people that I work with, one of the big things is about asking them what support they need as they come back to work, you know, and so not making any assumptions, taking the time to ask them and then listening and seeing and making a plan from there. And so in terms of what they want and what that looks like, you know, feeling valued, it can be around having policies and processes that support their return to work. What they want is a manager that really understands the challenges associated with that relatively short period of transition back to work. What an awful lot of people want is flexibility, not always ongoing flexibility, but certainly flexibility at the point of transitioning back in can be really helpful because it is such a big change for people. And then really just given a chance to ease back in without, I suppose, without judgments, without those things about that, you know, comments are going on a half day, without judgments, without assumptions, and you know, having the support tailored. And I suppose that is one thing. Not everybody wants the same thing as they come back, and so it is important to have a discussion with them as to what support they need.
And have you seen organizations have kind of formal kind of practices in place where, you know, before you know, both women and men are going off in either maternity or parental, around, you know, how they understand how to tailor those types of approaches?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of companies that I work with they'll have their policies and procedures that are quite clear as to what, I suppose, what the legislation says and what's best practice, but also they'll have support for people before they go on leave so they can actually take the time to think about what they're going to need as they're transitioning out of the organization and then back in. And so often that involves things like sitting down with their manager and making a broad communications plan about how it's going to work. And I don't necessarily mean now a detailed plan, but roughly having a conversation about agreeing that they'll, you know, catch up a few months before the person comes back, and at that point look at what they need as they're coming back in. So yeah, I would see an awful lot of relatively structured but flexible kind of processes in place for people coming back.
Great. Okay. So, Mary, what can managers do to support employees returning from maternity leave? And maybe you could speak a little bit about, maybe some of the practices that you have at PwC or just personally.
Yeah, no, very happy to do that. So actually, it's probably the other side of the coin of what Claire was saying. So it's about being open to those conversations. It's about asking the questions of your employees that are returning. I think staying connected to them throughout maternity leave, if you can, without obviously overstepping or bothering them, allows them to kind of come talk to you before they come back to say, look, this is what I'm thinking, would this work? And then it's about being flexible on both sides if you can. And I definitely, Claire's point resonates with me, that the flexibility can change and the requirements can change. And even the person, when they come back, can find that they want to change how they're working after they've been back a little while. And if you can be open to that, I really think you can come up with an ideal solution. But communication is key, because one size does not fit all. I've seen in my own organization, there's some people that find it really helpful to work 3 days a week, where they come in very early and leave early. Some people work 5 half days because maybe their kids are in Montessori. Some people like to work from home a day a week. And I think if you're open to working with people on what they need, you will get the best out of the employee. You have to understand as well that it's transitional time, and I felt that myself. I'm only back 6 months from my second baby, and what I thought might work for me at the start didn't when I got back, and then I had to change things up. And if people are open to that, I think we should be, as managers of people, then you can come to a solution that really works for everybody.
Great. And Mary, a couple of the questions that we got specifically was actually around the professional services, and probably for other organizations that are client facing. How can we facilitate flexible working for those returning mothers who are client facing, sitting, in clients, offices or organizations?
Sure. And this is one that I can understand why the question was raised, because even a number of years ago myself, I wouldn't have seen as much flexibility in client-facing roles, which I'm in and my team are in. And because you're on delivery mode and client have expectations, how do you manage that? But there's absolutely a way. I would see that the world has changed significantly, even in the last 5 years. Our clients are trying to do this for their own people. So it's about being open with the client. They can understand what we're trying to achieve. I do think it helps to have a look at your team structure and consider who's working with who. So what I would certainly try and do with my teams here is consider, if somebody is working flexibly, that maybe somebody else is there when they're out, or that the client understands who else they can speak to on the day that the person is off. And I think that's key, because if you're not respecting that person's flexibility and saying, oh, you can work, you don't have to work Thursday and Friday, but the client is still contacting you, I don't think it's fair to the employee. You have to come up with a plan that supports them for the times that they're not in the office. But it's certainly something that can be done, and it actually works very well. And I think people shouldn't be afraid to do it, and shouldn't be afraid of what clients think, because people are much more modern than we think now and are dealing with these issues themselves.
Great, thank you. So Karolina, I'm gonna turn over to you now. Karolina, I think you're 1 week back from your maternity leave, are you?
Correct.
So it's very fresh for you.
Yes.
So Karolina, one of the reasons we were excited to have you on talking about this today is because you lived in Ireland and you experienced maternity leave in Ireland, and now you're living in Sweden and you've experienced maternity leave in Sweden. So what can we learn from what in Ireland can we learn from other countries like Sweden when it comes to maternity?
Yes,
or parental?
Yeah. So I think before we start off, it needs to be said that Ireland and Sweden operate on 2 very different social policy models, and therefore there are a lot of dissimilarities there. And it is important to know that all maternity benefits in Sweden are covered by the state insurance agency, and so are not directly covered by the employer. So it has a huge impact on how the leave is viewed by the employers themselves. And so, I will say a few words about Ireland, but I will focus perhaps more on Sweden and try to draw a picture for you to say how it really functions here. So Sweden has a very advanced welfare system, and it's financed by very high taxes. But it does have one of the most generous parental leaves we know of. And so parental leave legislation gives both parents the opportunity to stay at home with the child in the first year of their life and up to 16 months. And that leave is distributed equally between both parents. Each receives 8 months, and parents then can decide on the split and can transfer days to each other, with the exception of 3 months that are allocated solely to each parent. And when we talk about maternity leave in Sweden and Ireland, I think the main difference starts already with the wording. We don't use the term of maternity leave. It's called parental leave because it applies to both parents. Yeah, so it's also a matter of gender equality that came up earlier as well. That women should be in no way disadvantaged because of their family situation, and the government works really hard on that, and there's even an equality bonus paid out to parents who manage to split their leave equally.
Amazing.
Yes.
Wow.
So there are differences there, and when we talk about returning to work, childcare is critical, and in Sweden it is very affordable. It's subsidized by the government. Again, the price is capped at about 120 euros per child a month. And then every child after the age of 1 has a guarantee of getting a place within 2 months' time of application time. One thing that also is very different to Ireland is additional leave in Sweden that is called short-term parental leave. And this is the leave that both parents can take to look after their sick child up until the child is 12. And that number of days is not minimal. It's quite significant. It's 120 days per child a year.
Per year.
So this is split between both parents, and we can see that it's being more and more used by fathers. Now even more than 50% fathers take the responsibility and stay at home with their children. And again, it's very important to underline here that this is also paid by the Swedish insurance agency, so it doesn't hit the employers' pockets. So it also is a reason why employers more easily and readily accept that as part of life. And from an employee perspective, it removes that fear perhaps of being overlooked in terms of career progression or even losing a job, because that's just how it works.
Yeah, it's incredible to, the differences when it's ingrained and it's not a burden on the employer, where it's, funded, all by the government, makes such a big difference in probably acceptance and norms.
Absolutely. And then if we talk about, what organizations do, so in Sweden, the work-life balance is hugely important, and government wants to enable women to return to work after maternity leave as soon as possible. And so there's a number of things that organizations do following that legislation. One of them is the flexible working hours arrangements. And this is, of course, we mentioned it, we talked about it before. It's, to help families solve the puzzles of work, of pickup and drop-ups and doctor's appointment and school closures. And then there's also a legal right for both parents to reduce their working hours up to 75% or 30 hours up until the child is 8. And that is about empowerment. And it's something that we talked about before as well, that it enables the employees to make a decision for themselves on striking that work-life balance and finding what is the solution that works for them. And it seems, when I think about Ireland, it seemed at the time when I was there myself, it seemed that the solutions offered in organizations were more individual and on the organizational level, but also on the personal level. So it seemed that the more senior you were, perhaps the more flexibility you had and more trust from your manager to be more flexible and work up your hours. But it wasn't the case for everybody. when it comes to returning to work, it puts enormous pressure on women, because as you mentioned yourself, it's women have to really prove their engagement. They have to show that they're engaged, that they bring value to the organization, because that they feel that they do not have the same rights or can't have the same expectations that their colleagues who perhaps work straight 12 hours in the office. And as you mentioned, it's a matter of mentality and culture. And shared parental leaves were introduced in Sweden already in 1974. So you can see that this has, since then, there has been a huge shift in how maternity leave or parental leave is looked at. So at the moment, my own experience is that nobody frowns upon nobody, and nobody rolls their eyes if you leave early or have to pick up the child. That's just the way it is. It's unavoidable. And if you have to dial in to the office from home and you have a child playing in the background, that's okay too, because everybody's in the same situation.
It's so interesting, the difference that it makes, because depending upon the organization that you work in, here some companies are really flexible, some aren't so flexible. So there's not really that equality that you were saying for everyone. That's kind of a fundamental right, so very, very interesting perspective. So Jeff, I'm going to move on to you now as the token male on the panel. So you have, worked obviously both in Ireland and Canada, as well as managed global teams around the world. What different approaches have you seen from a government and organizational perspective that support parents during and when returning from leave?
Yeah, and just hearing Karolina speak now about Sweden, I know it can just sound so idealistic and unattainable. The only challenge I'd make to Karolina is on the taxes. I actually find the tax rates in Sweden and Ireland versus services quite comparable. And so I wouldn't say that what you described comes at an additional cost. I think for the taxes we pay in Ireland and the benefits we pay out and receive, I think it's very manageable. But of anything that I want to spend time and energy on, it is reform in this space. And I'm very conscious as someone who chose to move to Ireland, I think 11 years ago, that I don't want to be one of those people who moves here and then complains about it. But if there's one thing that I think is worthy to call out, is the opportunity to share parental leave between men and women. And some of the challenges that Claire and Mary are dealing with on a daily basis in Ireland with their clients could be addressed if men took parental leave as well. If men went through the anxiety of leaving work for 6 months and experience what that's like to step out of a role for 6 months and re-enter the workplace for 6 months. Right now in Ireland, I don't think there's many men who have gone through that, because the government has not made it financially conducive. Not only do they not allow sharing, they actually don't allow the policy. There was a vote recently, Claire was telling me leading into this call, where the government outright refuses parents to share parental leave in Ireland. And so I'd really encourage people to reflect on what that could do, having that share. And then as Karolina was talking, not only is it, okay, you're allowed to share the parental leave, there's additional incentives if you do. So my brother, for example, lives in Canada, and in Canada, it's, yes, the mother can go and do all the parental leave, or they can get additional parental leave if they agree to share 50-50. And so now the conversation becomes one of, well, why is the man not taking parental leave? And so what they do, they have 2 children around the same age as our children, and in Canada they will do, the mother does the first 6 months, which makes sense with the feedings, and the father does the next 6 months. And what you see as a knock-on benefit to that is a more involved father in the household with parental leave, so that when the children are sick and can't go to school, or the childminder is sick, right, it doesn't automatically default to the mother because she was the one at home for the first year who has the relationship with the doctors and the school. Right, the father actually has a more involved relationship with the child and in the community. And so when there is a sickness and the child can't go to school, the responsibility falls equally on both parents and not default to the mother who's trying to juggle a career as well as look after the well-being of the children.
And I think as well, I know that, a lot of organizations have introduced parental leave for for the fathers as well to take. I know that when we were doing some of our research, we did have some partners talk around their experience with parental leave. Obviously, it's not it. I think the tendency, you guys probably know better than I do here, it tends to be about 6 weeks, but we are seeing companies going above and beyond and implementing those things, which is moving in the right direction, definitely.
Yeah, and I appreciate there's some input here on the panel, and I'd welcome more education on what is available to fathers. What I found on the Eurostat is that of the parental leave being offered to fathers, 90% of Europeans are not taking it. And in Ireland, I think it's 245 euros a week from the government for 2 weeks. And right now, with the way the system's set up, when families sit down and make decisions that's best for their family, the programs in place right now are not conducive for this type of shared program that Karolina is describing in Sweden. But yeah, welcome the audience to add additional input on how fathers could be more involved in taking the leave around families in Ireland. So thank you.
Great. Well, Claire, I was going to move to you next to, a lot of the questions that we were getting in was around best practices, which is kind of tying in everything, I mean, there's obviously so much that, that we can do from a government perspective, but, what can employers actually do to implement some of the best practices?
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose just to say, I really, I agree with what Jeff is saying, and I think, what Karolina is saying about in Sweden, it sounds fantastic, and I know that's something that they have worked really hard on over a long period of time. And I think what we've seen here in the last few years is the government has made, I guess, relatively small steps to put some changes in place, but it's just not enough. And I think that's why it's great that we're talking about this as part of International Women's Day, because, really what's that about? It's about highlighting where there are still ways to go from a gender equality point of view. So I think it's great to have this conversation. When we look at it, there's a massive piece around the point at which people start having families. The gender pay gap trebles here, and workforce participation rates drop significantly for women. So we absolutely have so much more that we can do, but we also have lots of great examples of companies driving things from a company perspective, and so if we look at best practices, well, there are a few different ones. I mean, there's how is it made up? There's lots of companies that have great practices around generous leave and phased returns, and I'm sure you'll all have seen some of that in the media over the last number of months. There are lots of companies that are significantly increasing the leave for partners, so for working for the dads as well, and other partners. And so we'll see, for example, even going beyond that, Vodafone is a great example, where they introduced quite generous leave for both parents, but also a phased return where for a certain period of time after you come back, you're paid for 5 days, but you're working for 4 days. And so that's a fantastic example out there for people. And I don't know anyone that wouldn't really welcome that. But then there are challenges with that. And we do see that there are cultural issues, organizational culture and beyond, about gender norms and men not taking that leave. And what can we do to increase that? And then we've lots of companies that aren't able to do that, aren't able to pay people for 5 days when they're working for 4. But looking at leave is one thing that you can do. And phased return, it doesn't necessarily have to involve giving additional leave. It can be how you use, say, accrued annual leave or accrued other leave towards the end of, say, the maternity or parental leave, so that they can have somewhat of a phased return back in, so it's not straight back in. So that's kind of on the leave side. Other best practices, I think educating line managers is such a big one that I think is making a really big difference. There's some really very excellent research at a DCU from 2018 where they interviewed HR directors, returners and line managers, and they found, which is pretty obvious, but it's great to have the research to back it up, that managers have such a big impact on the overall experience of returners. And where a manager sees it as a short kind of point in time, and overall quite a positive thing, well then it's a much more positive experience overall. So from a best practice, educating line managers on typical biases, typical pitfalls for people coming back, and broadly how to be an inclusive leader for working parents. I think that's a great practice that I see as having quite a broad impact culturally. And then other things and best practices around providing dedicated coaching support before and after leave. And so whether that's on a one-to-one basis or on a group basis, and where the benefit of that is it gives people time to plan before they go on leave and get into the kind of headspace of, okay, what are the likely changes and challenges over the next couple of months, and how can I put plans in place to make life as easy as possible on myself as I transition out, and then the same at the point at which they're coming back. And so to me, if you're, that's quite a holistic approach where you're looking at your policies, practices, and leave, you're educating your line managers, and then you're providing tailored support for people to prepare for the big transitions out and then transitions back in. So so there's lots of great practices out there, and it doesn't, I understand that lots of organizations feel that they have the challenges, they don't have the means, let's say, of the large international organizations, but you'll see a lot of what I mentioned there. You don't have, really, they're relatively small steps, educating your line managers, providing tailored support, using the leave that people have to provide some kind of flexibility as they come back. They're all relatively small things that can have quite a big impact for individuals.
That's great. And Mary, I was going to ask you kind of on the flip side, I guess, what would you see as kind of the main challenges for companies when supporting the employees that are returning?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a challenging time, I suppose. It can be a challenging time for everybody. I suppose recognizing that, but without making assumptions, I think is key in terms of each person coming back, because as I said before about one size doesn't fit all. Somebody coming back from maternity leave might be very focused on a promotion just around the corner. They might want to work 5 days a week. Someone might come back and have a different view or want to work flexibly, but also be concerned about their next promotion, or might say, I want to change into a different role that's too client facing. So I've seen lots of people go about things in a very different way. I have found, though, the phased returning aspect in my own organization very helpful for me and for others. So interesting that was discussed there. Yeah. What we do the same around training, but we don't mandate it, and I find that everybody wants it. But what we do is have kind of informally stay in touch days where people can come in, see what's happening. They feel more confident then maybe when they're returning. They also have the option to do their training while they're off so that they feel up to speed when they come back. But again, that's not mandated. But there's definitely challenges around it, but I think it's key to being open to it and understanding what each person needs. It's hard to make changes, right? And if we try and do the same things we always did, we won't be flexible, but then we're actually going to lose out on this key talent. And that's the thing. I think the overriding message I would have is absolutely it's challenging to do things differently. You're going to have to come up with a different policy or a different procedure, a different way of working with different people. But if you don't, you're going to miss out on a wealth of talent.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. So Karolina, with obviously you working at Oracle, you work with organizations around digital transformation. And as we know, in particular, human resources going through a massive transformation digitally at the moment. So maybe we could get your insights into how technology can enable this process and the employee experience.
Mm-hmm. So we would see a lot of changes in the approach to employees returning to work, and employees tend to now allow this short transition period, something that both Claire and Mary covered extensively at this point. And it's all about meeting the team again and completing outstanding tasks and compliance and skill trainings. Update your computer. Make sure you have access to relevant systems and similar. But it's hugely important to meet with HR and meet with the manager to talk about the possibilities of arranging those, agreeing on the plan, on working flexibly or working from home. Discuss also the demands on work travel, because that has also an impact on you know, a new family situation, and looking after a sick child and similar. And you know, it's at this time we see that a lot of companies want to start talking about personal goals for employees, look at their career progressions, their plans, and also start salary reviews that employee might have missed. And it's nearly is like onboarding again. And we see, you know, checklists in the employee in the employer's processes. So it's a check off, and it's a list, and you have you know, workflows, and everybody completes their parts. You meet with the relevant parties, we see a tendency now more and more to have this as a plan that is reviewed on a regular basis. So, you know, we allow this, usually it's allowed, let's say, a transition period of a week or two, and then the plan of the flexible working arrangement, it would be reviewed in a month's time, and 3 months' time, and 6 months' time, and then as required.
Yeah,
so that what we see.
That's actually a great point, to go back and to review it, to make sure, you know, to evaluate, is it still working? Are there things that we need to change? You know, ensuring that successful re-onboarding.
Yeah,
So,
and exactly, that the arrangement works for all parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, that's great. So Jeff, a lot of the questions that we that came into us was around communicating. So, you know, when parents are on maternity or parental leave, in your experience, what have you seen successful with communication before they go off, during they're off, and when they come back? What are some of the tips that you might have that work well?
Yeah, thank you. And Claire or even Mary may have additional tips from working with more clients. But on a personal perspective, and Claire touched on a bit on manager development. I think that manager is obviously so key, and that came out in the results. That having the right conversation at the right time. So leading up to the leave. And so one of my favorite conversations is that moment when a first-time mother tells their manager that they're expecting. And that right there, I think that actually is the most important conversation in getting that right. And for some managers, when they're having that conversations, their level of awareness on how to respond can range from 0 to 1,000, depending on their own personal circumstance. But their ability, like if they get it right versus if they get it wrong, the impact that can have is massive. And so it's empathizing it. And the mother who's coming to the manager for that conversation, she's been thinking about this for months, right? She's been keeping that little secret inside of her, literally, for this whole time. And she's actually worked out in her mind how the whole business is going to work, and all the concerns her manager is going to have, when really what the manager's only response needs to be is delight for the human being sitting in front of them, and concern for their well-being. And then as conversations progress, it's not one of like, we'll be fine without you. No, it's, we're going to miss you. You play such an important role in this team, in this organization. And, you know, we will find a way to make the business work while you're out, but you are going to be missed. And so how you can structure those conversations, or how you can train those managers to have the appropriate conversations, I think could have a big impact. And then to your question about communication when they're out, I think it was mentioned earlier that, you know, you need to agree with the person on what sort of communication they want. One of the things I see work well is to invite them to social events. I think in some cases there's legal requirements to invite them to the holiday party or other things, but I like to go out of my way and make them feel like, no, it'd be great if you were at this event, even though I know maybe that person probably won't want to attend or won't want to travel. But I think just making them feel like you're still a part of this. And then I think it was also mentioned having that meeting before you return, but even just keeping them up to date on the business. Like, when you're ready, let's sit down, have coffee. You don't have to come in the office. I can meet you, near your home or halfway or whatever. I can update you on all the things that's going on here and start to get you back in. And then lastly, what Karolina also mentioned was it's like you're re-onboarding. And one of the things that works really well, if you work in a large organization, I've seen this work well, is that if you can bring together the parents who are returning around the same time and create a community conversation where they can share openly what their experiences are, and you have a facilitator who will raise like, hey, here are some of the challenges and here are some of the ways, and you can actually see those relationships forge after they've returned to work, and they have this community group. If you have enough employees at scale, I'd highly recommend that, as that can work very well as well.
They're calling those, are those the returnships?
There's all sorts of names for it, but there needs to be some sort of onboarding. And I think it's great when you're in a situation and you're feeling something that might feel like anxiety, and then to realize that it's okay. Other people in the same situation as you feel that way as well. And here's how they've dealt with it. Or, if you feel like your manager doesn't understand and they're not empathizing, well, create a forum where they can have that conversation and share that feedback and maybe get advice on how they could deal with that manager. And what they should expect from their manager. And maybe that manager needs to know what's expected from them in those situations.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. Okay, so I think at this point, what I'd love to do is kind of go around the panel and ask you, what is the one takeaway, the one gem that you'd like the audience to remember and to walk away today on top of their mind? So I might pick on Mary first.
Sure. In my nature, I'm very positive. So my takeaway would be for those that are returning at the moment is not to underestimate your value. As someone who hires a lot of people and employs a lot of people, it's really hard to get people with your level of experience that already knows the firm that you're working on. It's costly to do recruitment, etc. So don't be afraid to go in and have the conversation about what is going to work for you when you return, because your employers really want you back, and don't forget that.
That's great. Karolina.
Yes, I completely agree. That's the way to move forward. But I feel like very important at this point is to look at the Ireland and tech companies in Ireland, and since they play such a major role in Irish economy, I feel that they have a much bigger responsibility and can play a huge part in putting certain demands on the government and lawmakers to develop a more holistic solution to the current problem, because it is always difficult to place demands on individual employers, but that would definitely start something big, and we have to start somewhere.
Great. Claire.
For me, I think a lot of this people have mentioned throughout, and there's been some great tips there, would be not making assumptions, and communication is key. And so from a returner point of view, I'd say communication, in that if you don't articulate what you want, chances are your manager and your organization are just not going to know. But don't make assumptions really on both sides, and that from an organization, from a manager point of view, if you're in any doubt as to what support is needed, have the conversation, ask somebody, because as Mary said, it's not a one size fits all. Yes, there are commonalities, but don't make assumptions. Ask, to me, is the most important part of this.
Great, thank you. And Jeff?
Yeah, my takeaway, again, this is a personal perspective. Having been in Canada, it's not necessarily my employer perspective, but my personal perspective is that equality at work starts with equality at home. And as many of the people attending this call right now, you have a voice in Ireland, and you can let your politicians know that you want to have the parental benefits equal for men and women, and create tax incentives and childcare incentives that allow men and women to equally share parental responsibility, so that they can both have prosperous careers in the workforce.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I really hope that everyone who's joined the webinar today has gotten some really good insights and inspiration for your maternity and your parental leave returners. We have recorded this webinar, so we will it will be available online shortly if you have some things that you missed writing down, you want to go back. And also, we always follow up our webinars with a white paper. Really important to to be able to pull all this information together in a way that then, you know, will help you as an organization to take some of these best practices away. The other thing is that there are some questions likely that we didn't get to today because of time. So what we're going to do is to make sure that we have addressed those questions in the white paper as well. So that'll come out in the next couple of weeks. I wanted to mention that we're going to be hosting another webinar in the next few weeks on how to keep your employees engaged while remote working, which is obviously something very timely at the moment. And please feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions. So again, I'd like to thank the panel very much for joining us today, and I'd like to wish everyone to have a great day today. Thank you.